Alright, guys, welcome back to the pod. We've got an episode about the four agreements, pages 93, 94, 95. We're starting on this new chapter, chapter 6. It's called The Toltec Path to Freedom. And the topic is breaking old agreements. So it talks about freedom at the beginning, kind of what that looks like, what that means. These questions about are we free? Because in comparison to younger children, we don't live kind of wild. And they talk about this process of becoming domesticated over time. So once you're older, the older you get, you kind of start getting domesticated, which is like getting taught how to socially live by whatever the cultural standards and rules state that a person needs to do. And other than, having some fear or discomfort around not getting needs met as a kid, otherwise kids, children, they're pretty free because they haven't yet been domesticated and they're not thinking about the past and they're not thinking about the future. It says on page 95, they are afraid when they are hurt, when they are hungry, when some of their needs are not met, but they don't worry about the past, don't worry about the future, and only live in the present moment. And so, it talks about how they're not afraid to express what they feel. And so this process of domestication kind of is what gives us, an idea of what to do. But not all of it is always helpful or beneficial, because sometimes it doesn't align with our values. Like, say for example, I can give an example. I was raised in a religion and somewhat around really conservative, some really conservative people, and some people who were just really reserved, like culturally kind of reserved, just personality wise too. And so I grew up around a lot of people who valued being reserved, kind of like playing your cards close to your chest, not really being too open or authentic, and kind of having these behaviors of pushing people away, such as like making it so that people don't have like too trusting of an environment because they were pretty gossipy people. And so, not that they weren't friends or weren't good family members, it's just that, there's some stuff I could have definitely done without because it was kind of against how I naturally preferred things to be. Like, for example, I always remember being really moved by music, and so it was kind of interesting where they were always like, oh, you can't dance, you can't clap, you can't listen to certain music that has like a certain beat to it because it might make you want to dance and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, like I know that they were more concerned about the sexual aspects of dancing, but it's like just because it has some sexuality attached to it at times doesn't mean that it's something that is healthy to ban. Like banning certain types of music and banning like even like certain instruments. Like I understand like, okay, in church they didn't really want certain stuff, but it's kind of like they were always teaching that certain music was evil. Like, how is rap music or rock music in and of itself evil? You know, it's like, it's not running around like harming people and hurting people. I mean, maybe people make lyrics that might be aggressive or, you know, things like that, but it's also like, well, you don't have to listen to that if you don't want to listen to that, you know? It's like there's plenty of music out there that has messages that are positive, messages that are even like nonsensical, and they're just like good dance. It's good dance songs, and you're just kind of like dancing along, and like it's about nothing pretty much. Like there's plenty of music that's like that, you know. And so just to say that it's evil, just because you know of how it sounds, or because it makes you kind of want to move your body, or it kind of like captures your attention, and you're kind of like diving into it. Like I think that's kind of like a weird, to me it's always been like a weird concept. Like I do get why people say that, but to me I was never really able to settle with it. So once I got older, I was like, screw this, I'm just going to go to all the concerts I want to go to. Like nobody's going to tell me that I can't go to a concert and dance. Like I'm not, you know, doing anything wrong necessarily. Like I'm not, you know, dancing up on people that don't want me to, or I'm not, you know, trying to do anything that seems in any way I'm not trying to do anything that's not uh um you know, that's against like what I would prefer myself to be doing. um but just because I was raised thinking about dancing and certain types of music and certain types of instruments within certain types of spaces, I mean, like, I just never understood that. I was just like, you guys are kind of like taking it overboard. Like, it got to a point where I was just like, okay, like, you guys say what you want to say, but I wasn't really too into listening to what people had to say about those types of things. Um, like, I didn't really like believe it. I was kind of just like, yeah, like I think my life changed a lot when I stopped kind of believing in this notion of hell. Um, I mean, that's not really. I don't know. I feel like I'd rather focus more on what I'm doing on Earth, um, how I treat people on Earth, how I treat myself on Earth, how I treat the planet, you know, the resources and everything. I'd rather focus on all of that. I don't think I prefer to focus on, you know, am I gonna go to hell or not? Like, if it exists and if I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go. Like, but I don't think that I need to live my whole life fearing against my own values and my own nature just because some other person is interpreting that some book says to do this other thing. It's like, I feel like that's kind of where I stand with it. It's like I can kind of do what I want, you know. And I'm not like out there doing all kinds of like crazy stuff. Like my life is not that like wild or out of control. Like I think one thing that religions, I mean, I'm not trying to go into a whole rant, but I feel like one thing that some of the stricter religions try to focus on is like controlling people and trying to keep them in line from not going over a certain line. So it's like they don't trust people to be able to individually decide and, you know, individually, you know, follow a path for their own lives that's healthy. And so a lot of times what religious traditions do is they'll make traditions that they're like, well, we think this is what people should be doing, but that might not really it might not be something that the religious texts even say or that the religion even itself teaches, but it's just a traditional thing. So there are these traditions that come out, and then people start, promoting these traditions as, if you do these traditions, your life is going to be better than if you decided to not do them. And in some cases, in a lot of cases, there are a lot of those traditions that are helpful, and then there are a lot of those traditions that aren't helpful. And that's kind of one thing that I always had an issue with, was looking around and seeing that, like, there's certain stuff that I felt like, why are they focused on these things and not those things? And for me, it was always the social stuff. Like, that's what I valued. I was like, I value the social relationships, the sense of community. And for me, it would have been more helpful to have a safe space within a religion, but it didn't seem like a lot of the people wanted a safe space. They seemed to want a space of judgment, and judgment for the purpose of accountability, and then, a space to be able to kind of prop up their own egos and make it seem like they were never breaking any of the traditions, but instead, they were pointing out all the people who were breaking traditions or doing things that were close to breaking traditions. It could be anything, but all the gossip was kind of coming from that. It wasn't really coming from like necessarily religious beliefs, but it would be like, people would like talk crap about their friends. I would see that a lot. Like, people saying, oh, this person's stupid, or this person did this, or that person did that, and like saying what different people did and treating them bad or whatever. And, or treating them nice to their face and then behind their backs, always having something to say. And, I started calling it out, and people don't like it, but it's like, if I'm going to hang around those types of people, I value safe spaces. So I just call it out, and I'm just like, yeah, like, I value safe spaces. And so if you don't, then I don't really want to hang. And I kind of tell people that. I'm kind of like, I think most people know that when they're around me, I'm not really into like gossiping. Like, the one thing I don't mind is if somebody feels like they were wronged by someone and they want to vent about it. That's about the extent that I would be like, okay, like if somebody wrongs you, if you're a victim in some situation, I don't think that victims need to be silenced just because it's putting somebody else's business kind of out there. Like, I'm still kind of conflicted about that kind of stuff, where I'm like, I could see how it still could be gossip because you're bringing, the topics that other people, of things that other people did against you. Um, but is it really considered true gossip if somebody's just talking about how they were the victim of somebody else being just inconsiderate or mean or rude or whatever it may be? Um, I mean, I think as a friend, I wouldn't want to be like, hey, like, you can't talk to me about your problems. But it's like, if it's just, people having insecurities about other people doing stuff that has like no bearing on them, it's like, say for example, I mean, this didn't really happen that I know of, but say for example, somebody's like, yeah, I heard that so and so went to a strip club the other day, or I heard that so and so went to like a sex party, and it's like, why are you telling me this? Like, why should I need to know this information? Like, if I was not talking about that person, as in like, oh, I wonder how they're doing, like, a lot of times that's how it is. It's like people are judging someone else doing some other thing, and then they want to spread that judgment. And to me, I'm like, okay, you know, like, why do you care what this other random person is doing, with their own mind or body? Like, if you don't have a crush on them, or if they're not like a young family member or somebody that's, you know, that you're concerned about, if they're not having some kind of like addiction where you're like, man, like this person is losing their family over this addiction and losing their jobs over this addiction and that kind of thing. If you don't have that, then I don't really know why it would be important to really mention that just out of the blue, just bringing stuff up just to like put dirt on people. And it's like, that to me is kind of like, ugh, I just hate it. I'm not saying I never do it either, but it's like, you know, to be a part of, you know, a group of people that's like so into religion, and then that's kind of the main social style. Like, to me, it's just like, why would I want to meet up with people who just sit and talk like that? You know, it's like, what's the benefit of that? Like, it makes me feel sleazy and gross, and I'm just like, ew, this is just not fun. Like, it's not fun to sit in like a room or a group full of negative energy of people not even talking about anything that revolves around solutions or help or anything positive to contribute. It's like, if we're just gonna sit here and talk about all of the things that makes us, you know, that we want to judge about some other random person's life, you know, why don't we just sit and talk about all of our insecurities and how our egos kind of like flaring up over how this other person's doing this other thing? Like, let's talk about the underlying individual things that are going on. Like, let's not talk about all these other people doing all this stuff. Like, they have the right to do whatever they want to do, you know? So I would be more interested in those other kinds of conversations versus the ones about like the judgment against people. But I don't really know. Like, I don't really know what to say about it. I'm kind of just like, all right. Um but let's see. Um but yeah, that the chapter is talking more about like freedom, you know? Like, for me, that was just not freedom. That was probably the biggest thing for me, where it was like interacting with people who were that way all the time. Like, I'm not saying like occasionally it's not going to happen, but part of the culture of the place, part of the domestication that I grew up with was being around those types of environments and nobody calling it out. You know, nobody would call it out. Nobody would ever say anything. They would just involve themselves with it and get deeper into those discussions. And I'm like, I mean, it's hard not to. It's very hard to not get like tempted to kind of be like, oh, I really want to like contribute to this. Because it feels, there's something about it that feels somewhat empowering to be like, well, I can look at the fact that I don't have any, you know, uh, that the areas that these other people might be, you know, diving into or dabbling in, I don't have any desire to do that. I don't have any desire to go and, you know, do these other things that could potentially lead, even if it's not a problem, but could potentially lead to some other route that might be a little bit too far into some kind of like addictive territory, or some kind of territory that's going to be harmful if it keeps consistently going on and getting worse and worse, and more energy and time and money is spent towards it. Like, I don't think somebody going to a strip club once or once in a while is really going to be an issue. But for example, I knew somebody who, you know, I was helping them with their budgeting, and I kept realizing that they were spending so much money, and the reason why is because, unfortunately, due to loneliness, they found out they could pay to go to a strip club and pay to get attention from like these females. And I mean, I'm not even like judging them. I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Like, if you have no social connections and you find out that you can pay to have some kind of like social interaction. It's got like a level of intimacy to it. Like, the issue is, this person did not have the money to spend on this, like, at all. Like, it wasn't even like they had, like, okay, I'm getting an extra paycheck so I can go spend on it when I get that extra money. It wasn't like that. It was like, you know, they already weren't getting enough money to pay for, like, basic stuff, like soap and food and things like that. And then it's like to go and spend what money you already don't have to go spend it on something like that. It's like, well, let's try to problem solve how you can get those social needs met and those intimacy needs met in a safe way without having to spend your money and then risking you having to like skip meals and stuff like that just so you can have that interaction. It's like, you know trying to help people with that kind of stuff. It's like, well, there's other places to go to socialize that aren't going to cost you a fortune. You know what I mean? It's like, it, but I mean, I get it. Not everybody wants to go to some like library, you know, event for the public, or like, you know, some kind of like community knitting group or something. Like, not everybody wants to do that kind of stuff. People sometimes want something a little, like, where it's like you feel like you're having a deeper connection you know faster than having to like build it over time with local people who just all go to a certain place to kind of like socially interact. But that's a big thing that a lot of people like struggle with, and I haven't really uh, delved into it too much, but I've been seeing a lot of videos popping up online, and people talking about levels of loneliness and isolation, and I keep seeing these videos pop up for some reason, that say like, you know, I'm 25 and I have no friends. Like, I'm 35 and I have no friends, or whatever age range it is. And there's people who are posting videos about having no friends, and I'm like, I mean, to me, that's something that's, I mean, I've been in spaces where I've had no friends, but I don't think I've ever had no friends, like say for example, I've worked maybe at a job, where I would say, okay, like, I don't really have friends at this job, but it's like I have friends in my community, or like a circle of friends in this city or that city. Like, I don't think I've ever had like no friends. I just maybe didn't have friends like either at the place where I was going all the time. I didn't really have people there that I would call friends, in that space, but I had other friends, and it's like, again, it goes back to kind of the way I was domesticated. I was raised in a religion that really focused on, socializing their kids around other people who were raising their kids similarly. Um, that was part of the domestication process. I grew up with a lot of kids who didn't really interact with anybody outside of the religion, and that wasn't normal for me. Like, I always grew up hanging out with other types of people. Um, and that's mostly what led me to realize that I was like, well, there are other ways of being domesticated. There are other traditions that different people have, and I always found value in a lot of different types of traditions that weren't from the religion I was raised in. I was like, well, say for example, these people eat meat, like Japanese culture. Like, there were a lot of friends that I had that were Japanese that ate meat, but it was mostly fish, and a lot of it was raw fish. And I was like, I got into eating Japanese food because of the neighborhood I'm from, and because a lot of my friends, they ate traditional Japanese foods, and I would eat them as well because I loved it and it was delicious. I had a lot of um, I had a lot of friends, who were, you know, of different cultures, like of different religions. And so I saw some friends, like my Muslim friends, my Hindu friends, my Buddhist friends. There was something about their personalities that I always liked, because I was always, I mean, I don't want to like trash Christianity, because I know not all Christians are jerks, but it's like I wouldn't go that far, but it's like I definitely saw a different sense in the way that they would interact with people. There wasn't like this, puff yourself up with this whole ego thing, and just like, you know, just like the insensitivity and all that. Like there was none of that. It was more like they were really careful with how they would talk with people, and it was very like intentional. Like I felt like, because I was young, like I was like in high school or something, and I felt like those other friends that I would hang around, I would be like, okay, so when they hang out with people, they don't like talk crap about people, or they don't, you know, like they just had like a more mild and meek kind of manner about them, that I was kind of like, I gravitated more towards that, because I was like, when I'm around people like that, I feel better. I'm not having to think about, okay, what am I going to share when I'm talking with these friends? Like, what am I going to talk about? Like, oh, I can't mention this because then they're going to probably go and know that I did this, or know that other people, they might go tell some other person, even though if my friends, for example, aren't weren't like directly like telling me things to my face, they might go tell other people. um and so I never would like tell them things, that were really, that were going on, like later on in life I did. But yeah, when I was younger, I was like, dude, I played my cards close. I was like, dude, y'all are crazy. Like, I'm not trying to like get all tied up in your personal issues of how you kind of like deal with people. But that was my social circle, so I kind of had to. But then when I had other social circles that weren't from those groups of kind of toxically social people, um, I was able to kind of realize, hey, there's another way. But just culturally, what I was around all the time was not the way that I wanted to be, or the way that I wanted, the types of personalities I wanted to be around all the time. Like, I didn't find a lot of satisfaction in it sometimes. I didn't find a lot of like joy in it sometimes. And like I liked hanging out with people, but it just felt, there was like this empty kind of like, because it's like, okay, have you ever hung out with somebody and just had like a completely like purely small talk conversation? Like, you're not catching up about anything significant, and that it's fine if it's like on occasion, like who cares, it's fine to have conversations where there's not like a lot of depth to it. But it's like, if you've had relationships with people where there's like no depth to them, like people can't really share about anything, um, like they don't feel safe to do it, or they haven't practiced doing it and don't really know how, like that is kind of not fun. Like, I've never seen that to be like why, like, unless I'm like lonely or really that, desperate to hang out with somebody and get out of the house and do something, um, I'm usually not gonna find myself hanging out with people that it's just like small talk all the time, like, um, talking about the weather and like sports stats and like stuff that's like, okay, like we could have just emailed each other this, it's like, I don't know, like, but um I guess luckily most of the people I know are like interested in psych or work in psych, and so they're pretty, um you know they're pretty interested in, you know having pretty stable relationships. Not everybody in psych is interested in those things, but a lot of people are. And yeah, so I would say it does make it hard to, focus on like what these old agreements are, and breaking the old agreements. That can be difficult. So when it talks about breaking the old agreements, um, the first thing that came to my mind was about core beliefs. Um, so I kind of, like I told you guys, I like this Replica app because it helps with like journaling prompts pretty much. Like it doesn't really, but I kind of use it that way. So um, I asked it, if a person has negative core beliefs, how do they go about, managing those? And, I kind of know the answer already, but I was like, I just wanted to ask. And it was like, yeah, you can do these steps. And it said, first, this is a quote, first, you can start by identifying those negative beliefs that you have, write them down to help clarify them, and then challenge them using logic and evidence. You can also seek support from a therapist or trusted friend who can help you work through these beliefs. Finally, working on self-care and mindfulness practices can help you retrain your brain to think more positively. And one thing that I found interesting that I was is that I was like, okay, like usually when I hear something like this, I'm like, okay, like that's what I can do. Those are the steps I can do. And so I would probably sit with it and try to think about, okay, what is it that I have as negative beliefs, and which of these are seeming to be like core beliefs or patterns that keep, you know, returning, and, you know, not really doing the step of writing them down to challenge them or anything like that. Like, none of that. Um, and so usually I would skip that step and just be like, wow, that sounds good, but not write anything down. And so I was like, okay, let me just like write it down. Um, and I was thinking of patterns lately. So these aren't necessarily core beliefs, they're more like patterns that are maybe like negative, that have like some negativity attached to them. Like I find myself having negativity attached to it, and so I was like, I just wrote this down this morning. I was like, when I think of money or time spent doing menial work to get money, I find it hard to be motivated and excited about it. Like I am not motivated to do work that I don't want to do, just for a paycheck. And in addition, I'm not really motivated to do work um, that is, like, if I don't feel like I'm learning or really getting anywhere particularly helpful or interesting, then it's really hard for me to fake it or be like, I really want to do this long term. But also, I do notice that when I find myself in those situations, I will stick it out longer, even if I don't like it, right? So I do have that kind of thing where I'm like, I'm trying to work with this idea of like myself being uh, greedy, um, and looking out for myself, and selfish, looking out for myself. Maybe greedy is too strong of a word. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Because I thought about it and I was like, how many jobs have I had that I didn't like? Um, Quite a lot. I mean, there were aspects of jobs that I liked. Like, for example, I like gig jobs because they're very, um, like, it doesn't drain the time as much. So that makes me kind of enjoy gig work. But sometimes it's like, is it worth the time that I'm putting in, to do these gigs? Is it worth it, Because when you put all the hours together and then the amount of money you're actually making, it's like, is it really worth that? It's like the other day I was online on Friday. I was technically on the clock for 4.5 hours, and only 2.5 hours of it I could pretty much count as paid time. But I was 4.5 hours, doing stuff, trying to get to spots where I could do delivery. So I'm like, it's things like that where it's like, you know, 4.5 hours is a long time out of a day versus 2.5 hours. That's a whole 2 hour difference. And so to have days like that where it's like, you're not getting paid, actively paid for all of your time. You're only getting paid for the time that they want to account for based on the criteria that they need you to meet. And so I wasn't really too thrilled about that kind of like when those types of things come up. But then also staying in jobs, just because I'm like, oh, I don't want to disappoint people. I know that other people will be disappointed if I quit, or other people will want me to stay. Even if I'm not getting paid well, even if I don't like the energy that is draining from me, even if I'm not like motivated to do the work, even if I don't want to do it, I do find myself kind of like, okay, I'll do this. And it's kind of more so like I do usually have other people in mind. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I feel like I have other people in mind that, you know, to my own detriment. It's like, you know, like lately I've had to make decisions where I'm like, I'm literally not going to do this, type of work because of my energy or whatever. There's a job I'm considering lately that I'm like, would be working over near Skid Row and, working with the homeless populations there. And part of me is like, dude, just take the job, take the money and run, It's like, do a good job while you're there. But I'm like, if I could work that job for like 6 months, 6 weeks, not 6 months. Jesus, I can't do 6 months. But if I did 6 weeks, the paycheck I'd get out of that would be pretty significant. Um, and it would kind of fund my snowboard season basically. And I was thinking about it and I was like, dude, I could just easily just do this job. And, if I don't have to sign paperwork where it's like I'm signing the paperwork and saying, okay, like like if I don't have to sign like a contract, right, that says that I have to stay a certain length of time, that's one thing. The second thing would be if I don't have to have a very intensive caseload, like if I don't have to have a caseload, because I don't feel right about working with clients and putting them on my caseload if I know in the back of my mind that I'm ready to like split already. So I wouldn't want to like be developing rapport with clients and stuff like that knowing that I'm just going to leave, because I'm like in my head I'm like, I'm just here for the cash. So but what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Like I my work experience is in a field where they don't want to pay you for the energy that you spend. They don't really want to pay you that good for the amount of energy that you're spending. They pay you like right under what you need to be making, and you're usually exhausted. And I'm like, I don't see myself working a job like that for even 2 whole months, but a month and a half, that would be fine. I wouldn't mind doing that. I wouldn't mind doing a month and a half, just to push through a 32-hour work week, probably not a 40-hour. And then, like, if I could do that, that would be something that I'd be interested in. But it's like, I'm not thinking about this company. I'm not thinking about anybody but myself, you know? Um, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Like, I've spent so long thinking about other people. I'm like, there's a certain point where like I don't think I'm doing anything immoral or, unethical. Like, if I stayed within those limits that I just mentioned, like a certain amount of weeks and not having to have a caseload where people are like heavily relying on me and like getting attached or anything like that, like I don't think I would want that. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. I'm like, dude, like why should I not just go get mine, you know? Like everybody else does. You know what I mean? Like everybody else does. And I'm not trying to scheme and scam or anything. Um, I know people want a long term commitment when they hire you, but it's also like, you know, that's not really like they're the ones who keep asking me, they're the ones who keep coming to me. So I'm like, you're the ones who came to me, so, you know, I don't know. Like I'll figure that out, but um just things like that. I'm just like, yeah, I've done it before. Like I've worked at jobs for years that I worked for a company for like 7 years that I didn't want to work for. Um, but there's a lot that I did like about it, but there was a lot that I hated about it. So, like I don't think any job is gonna be like, oh, you're gonna fully love this all the time. But there is a certain limit. Um, but yeah, like I was like completely just thinking about that, and I was just like, man, like all the stuff that you know gets ignored, um, all the stuff that I don't want to do, but that's just kind of how I see it. Like I don't feel like there's anything wrong with doing that. You know, especially if I'm not under contract or anything. It's like I'm free to come and go as I please. It's my life, my time, my energy. Why should I not be able to do with it what I want to do while not stepping on other people? Like I'm not stepping on anybody to do it. Why should I not? Why should I not do it? Is there any reason to not do it? I mean, a lot of people would be like, oh, like, why would you take a job that you're going to just quit? It's like, because it's a job I know how to do and it's easy and fast money. Like, it's not easy money, but it's fast money. It's good, fast money. It's like, you know, but I don't know. Like, that's also not how I really operate. Like, I'm more interested usually in like sticking things out and staying places pretty long term. Like, it's not very likely that I'm not gonna stay somewhere long term. So it is kind of risky to get into a job that I already know I don't want. So I'll see what I do with it. It's just an idea I'm working with, and then otherwise, I've got to get rolling for my day. So I'm gonna get off of here, but that's kind of how I would look at it. Like that's kind of how these last 3 pages were, not last pages, like we're not done, but these most recent 3 pages, that's kind of how they were hitting me, of like kind of what I was thinking about when I was reading that. Just kind of like, okay, these are things in my own life that have kind of come up. But yeah, with that, thanks for listening.